Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third one of our dialogues. Today's discussion is about the Swedish pension reform. We are honored to have here with us today Mr. Karl Gustaf Scherman, former Director General of the Swedish National Social Insurance Board. As we all know, retirement can be a difficult process and very long, and it is important to take steps early on to ensure that we are financially secure during this stage of our lives. Pension plans are one way to do this, and today we will be learning some more about the different pension plans and reforms around the world. And how can they help us to achieve our retirement goals? One of the best is the Swedish reform. We are fortunate to have an expert on the topic with us today to guide us through the discussion. We will be sharing his knowledge and experience, and he will be able to answer any of your questions. I hope you find this talk informative and valuable, and it will inspire you to take action towards securing your financial future. Alejandro, David, can you please share with us the CV or the resume of Mr. Karl?
Sí, buenas tardes, y esto lo voy a hacer en español para hacerlo más rápido. Y es un breve resumen del currículum del profesor Scherman, porque si no estaríamos aquí una hora, pero para comentarles rápido, profesor Karl Gustaf Scherman es un ciudadano sueco, tiene una maestría de la Royal Technician University en ingeniería, también tiene un máster en Business Administration del Stockholm School of Economics and Business Administration. Fue el director general del Sistema Nacional de Insurance de Suecia por más de 15 años, de 1981 a 1996. Él fue responsable por manejar y supervisar todo el sistema de seguridad social de Suecia. Durante esa asignación, estuvo muy activo en otros trabajos y en otras obligaciones, preparando lo que fue después una famosa reforma que hizo en 1994 al Seguro Social sueco. Estuvo muy envuelto en el análisis de seguros sociales de sistemas a través de todo el mundo y no cabe duda la reforma sueca. El profesor Scherman es un presidente honorario de la International Society Security Association. Esta asociación tiene más de 320 miembros de las instituciones de seguridad pública de más de 160 países distintos. También es presidente de la asociación, de esta asociación desde 1992 al 1998. Es autor de muchas publicaciones en materia de seguro social, no nada más en sueco, sino a nivel internacional. El profesor Scherman es muy activo en comunicaciones y sistemas de pensiones y ha participado con el World Bank, con la Sociedad Internacional de Seguridad Pública y con muchos otros grupos, también con expertos a nivel mundial sobre este tema. Muy conocido él sobre todos los sistemas, estuvo participando recientemente en las discusiones con Francia, que están pasando en estos momentos cuando están haciendo cambios allá muy importantes. Es para mí un privilegio presentarles al profesor Karl Gustaf Scherman. Muchas gracias por esta oportunidad de hablarles y Alejandro, te paso la palabra.
Muchas gracias, David. Many thanks, David. Yo voy a ser muy breve. I'm going to be very brief. Y lo voy a decir tanto en español como en inglés para que el profesor Scherman también pueda oír el mensaje. Primero en español. Es muy probable que la mayoría de los que están escuchando este diálogo intergeneracional no se van a dedicar a pensiones. Pero eso no hace que la presentación sea menos interesante. Yo creo que el método que utiliza el profesor, los ángulos, la forma en que ve las diferentes opciones y las diferentes dimensiones que tocan al tema de las pensiones, es algo que podemos aprender cuando lo estemos aplicando en cualquier otro tipo de seguro, cuando estemos en la banca o cuando estemos en la farmacia o en la medicina o en el sistema de salud. El trabajo actuarial como tal exige un método, exige una responsabilidad. And just this is a message for the students, Carl. And I know that many of them don't think themselves as pursuing a career in the public pensions field. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, I think that your presentation is going to be really very interesting. I invited them to appreciate the method that you utilize, how you put together these complex multidimensional issues and make sense of them. Un elemento muy importante, y con esto concluyo, es que la ética y la honestidad. Karl Gustaf, por más que él ama Suecia, por más que él ama su seguro social que dirigió durante 15 años, tiene un ojo crítico y no se siente mal por ser crítico, precisamente porque él quiere a su seguro social, porque él se preocupa por el seguro social, es que hace las críticas para que se mejore. Yo creo que esto es algo muy importante que a veces lo olvidamos porque sentimos que tenemos alguna responsabilidad de defender y de apoyar el sistema que tenemos en el país como si este fuera inmovible. Y la verdad que lo mejor que puede pasar es que sea dinámico, que se ajuste a las nuevas circunstancias demográficas, económicas y financieras y que vaya corrigiendo sus errores. Just a few words, Carl. I just told them that I really appreciate in your presentations the fact that you're completely honest and with ethics, and you criticize the issues that you think that should be criticized in the Swedish pension model, because you love Social Security, because you love the pension model, and you really are worried that the decisions are taken on the right sense. So I think with this invitation, the students are really ready to hear you. So, dear professor, the floor is yours.
I thank you very much. Let's see now if I can succeed in getting in. And let me first say that I am very happy to have been invited to talk to you. As far as I know, it's to many young people, the students, and I think it's important for you to know about this Swedish model, as it has been so very much sold, if I could say it this way. And let me begin by saying that when I discuss pensions, and I had done it throughout the world for very many decades, I do it based on the idea that it should offer a balance between pensions, pension age, and contribution. And this is what we want the politicians and other responsible people when it comes to public pensions really always think about. And then, as I said, the responsibility is to establish and uphold a balance. And then I have to say, and this is the heading here, well conceived, badly implemented. I mean, there are very many good ideas in the Swedish pension system, and I will enumerate them for you. But I am sorry to say that the social outcome has tended to be forgotten. I mean, it is financially stable. But as I said, the social outcome has not been discussed. Work longer, yes. But where are the employment opportunities? And what do we do with those who cannot work? And there are so many problems when it comes to the way in which we take care of those who cannot work so long as we want them to do. And then I say, how could this happen? What happened was that everything was gradually made automatic. This basic responsibility, as I have just mentioned, to strike a fair balance between pensions, pensions age, and contribution, that vanished altogether. And that is what I am going to speak about now. And in the following, as urged to do it, I'm going to cover the old system and tell you what the problems were, the new system, how it is designed, the international reactions, the performance and the problems that it has met, and at last, the recommendations. Those recommendations are the recommendations that I put forward to the Swedish government. Let me already say when it comes to the international reactions. One thing that I, as a Swede interested in the Swedish pension system, am sorry for, is that I think that the international financial organizations, so to speak, kidnapped the Swedish system. I'll tell you about that too. Okay, then a couple of words about this old system. It contained benefits to retired, disabled, and survivors, a flat rate basic pension to all, an earnings-related pay-as-you-go scheme with cash supplements gradually increased for those in need. And to this, this was introduced in the 60s, in the beginning of the 70s, it was introduced a means-tested housing supplement. There are other additional benefits. As you very well know, Sweden is an established welfare state. When it comes to financing, the pay-as-you-go pensions are paid by contributions on employers' total wage bill, and other benefits are a combination of contributions and general revenue. Those are issues that are important to understand and keep in mind when one discusses what the problem became. First, let me only mention the design of the pay-as-you-go system. A person had to work 30 years inside the system in order to be entitled to a full pension. Income were during these years registered. Pensions were based on average earnings over the 15 best years. And this first year pension was based on 60% of average best years. But these best years were indexed only to cost of living, not to wages. The whole system was based on indexing to cost of living. And then let's see which problem it met. And all of those problems stems from the fact that revenues was based on wages and benefits on cost of living. When the system was enacted, the ceiling, I mentioned the ceiling, for the system covered nearly all earnings. By 1994, the ceiling due to wage growth was reduced to 60% of its former real value, which excluded more and more earnings. And with continued growth, the whole system would gradually transform into a flat rate basic pension. And that was what we tried to tell the responsible politicians over the whole decade of the 80s. Then we come to some other problems. Here I mentioned that the pension, the first year's pension, was based on the average of the 15 best years. And then you got 60% of this average. But that was indexed to cost of living. if the person had a gradual increase in his or her real wages, then of course the first year's pension became less and less and less as compared to last year's wage. On the other hand, when it comes to costs, as revenues are dependent on total wages, pensions are dependent on prices, then we can see cost driving forces are increased life expectancy, the baby boom generation approaching pensionable age. So we have more and more pensioners. But we have a cost reducing effect. As I mentioned, contributions and taxes follow real wage. Benefits are kept based on figures only following prices. So then we have this very dramatic long-range projection. In 1990, we could say that the cost was 22.5% of wages. But when we come to 2025, with 0% rate growth in real wages, then the contribution would be needed to be 49.2%. With a high increase in real wages, it would go down to 74%. And why? Because, as I mentioned, contributions were based on the total wage bill, but at a higher and higher rate of increase in real wages, then the part of these wages, the total earnings that were covered by the pension system was less and less. I mean, this is very much information, and those students that are listening might need to look into this, go into all these slides again. And there are also references made in this that you can read in these slides. Okay, now when we have said this, we must understand that these problems were problems only because politicians did not intervene and change the system. The National Social Insurance Board tried for 50 years to get them to do anything, but it was not only when it came a financial crisis that something happened. And now we can broaden the view of this, because you see, it was very much the same in all the traditional pay-as-you-go defined benefit systems. It only grew, and there were promises, and they did not adjust it. So in many countries, not only in Sweden, you could see that it could be a much higher need of contributions in the future. And now economists and financial institutions, such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and others, claimed in and urged that politicians cannot handle this. In 1994, the World Bank published a book called Averting the Old Age Crisis, saying that politicians should leave this out. We have to introduce individual accounts, that is funded systems. Chile, that many of us might know about, was hailed as a good model. Everything should be done to get the politicians out of this. I and many others did not like this development. And at last, but too late, ISSA, but I was the president, and ILO reacted. And I mean, in fact, these 4 observations should call for a lecture of its own, because it takes us out on the world scene. And I think that everyone who wants to study actuarial science should go into this. Now we come to the new system, because the problems that I described finally got the politicians to do something, and that was a complete reorganization of the system. The new system has a minimum guarantee that is tax financed, which means that if the earnings-related pension does not reach a certain level, then there is some addition from tax financing. And then we have an earnings-related pension. Around 85% of all earners' total income is covered by this system. And this is split into two subsystems, one pay-as-you-go, one individual account. I can tell you without going into this very much in detail that I am not very fond of these individual account systems, but it was a pure political compromise to get something done at all that lead us to accept that out of 18.5% of contribution, 205% was allotted to this individual account system. Important to understand is that in this transition, all old pension rights were carried into the new system. There was a very big pension fund that was gradually built up, and this should be used to secure the old system rights. After all, although I am going to tell you about some things that has happened, very many good things have really been done. And I should say, a well-conceived pension system with this minimum guarantee, index to the cost of living, this pay-as-you-go 16%, and this individual accounts. And the one who is interested in details can go into these subheadings and see how this is designed in detail. I'm not going to into that anymore just now. And I mean, the strength of this new system is that it offers incentives. Oh, did I mention that? No, I haven't. I must mention that in the new system, as a difference to the old one, it was quite a new basis for the pensions. That is the whole life's earnings that are registered and indexed to real wages, which means that for each year you work more, you get a better pension. And the benefits were based on wages, not on prices. And that means that the risk of an imbalance between benefits and contribution diminishes. And as the whole life earnings is the basis of the pension, and when you draw it, the height of the first year's pension is dependent on the life expectancy for you when you draw the pension. That means that when a life expectancy increases, then you have to work longer in order to get a decent pension, which means that pension promises are improved. All these are strengths if there only had been followed up in a reasonable way. Now we have to see that there were also risks. a successive reduction of minimum pension. As I said, it followed cost of living, make it less and less as compared to pensions in the face of economic growth. When the full working career is the base for earnings-related pension, then pensions become heavily dependent on external factors. I'll come back to that. And this calls for regular scrutiny and, if needed, adaptation. And once again, that is what the Swedish politicians have missed. One of the leading experts in ILO, Michael Sison, said, this is a very good reform, because it will help to explain to the general public that we can't go on with these defined benefit systems that were prevalent, at least in Europe at the time. But then something happened. And that was only a couple of years after the system was enacted. And you see, there was a forecast for the need for contributions in the future that said that it would not be any big need for increases in the contributions. I must confess, I was responsible for that. But other experts proved that this was not correct. Instead of accepting this and accepting that, yes, we might need to increase contributions in the future, a special feature, the automatic balancing mechanism, was introduced, which means that if there are risks for an increase in contributions, this kicks in and reduces pensions in payment. And this is the NDC, the notionally defined contribution system that most of you have heard about or will hear about. And it was said that it was defined so as that the contribution rate will be maintained into the future. And this was the reason why the international financial institutions began to, should I say, sell this system onto the world. Once again, now we have a system, lifetime earnings becomes the basis for the level of retirement pension, meaning that a full pension and a normal pension at age becomes irrelevant. Increased life expectancy becomes a factor in the calculation of pensions, thereby steadily raising the age when a person can retire with an adequate pension. And we have all the time to remember that these are the basic of the system, and that is the big problem. Okay, then we have this fund pension, the individual accounts. We have the successive phasing out of the minimum pension. The problem is that the politicians had this feeling that, okay, we have done an automatic system. We do not need to do anything to it. And this is what has been the case for 25 years. Pension policy was reduced to guarding a system and the unity of political parties. You can hear that I am really criticizing this, and I have been doing it for 15 years. Okay. In addition to what I said, it is said that there should be no tax subsidies to the system. And I mean, people seemed at the time, I will then it's in the 90s, to be indifferent, because they thought that what had happened was that the old system was bettered and preserved. And then this was known out in the world because it came from Sweden, the well-known welfare country. So it's no wonder that finance ministers around the world, no political quarrel, contributions cannot ever be increased. This is what was sold throughout the world and has been dominating the situation in Sweden. Then, once again, international expert came in. Michael Sison said, this new system symbolizes a fundamental shift away from a solidarity-based way of coping with emerging new demographic, economic, and social problems. And I mean, you have to remember this. If you introduce something of the sort that Sweden did in the beginning of the end of the 90s, you have to follow it up and make changes. Okay, and Christoph Hagemeyer, another ILO expert, said, you have to observe that pension policy is part of overall social policy. I mean this as an opposition to this belief that it was reasonable to get the politicians out. I have already said that I succeeded in Sweden. They haven't gone into it, but now I come back to that. Now let's see how this system has performed. So far I have been talking about the theories. There we have the minimum guarantee. If we begin in the end of the 1990s with a sum, and then we have here the development of the minimum pension. And here we have as the wages has increased, meaning that the gap between the minimum and the wages has grown and grown. This has had the effect that politicians have increased this means-tested housing supplement. So what has happened is that this that was thought was meant to follow, give some sort of a floor for the general pension. Instead, it has transferred poverty risk to the individual. So means-tested benefits has been needed to increase. Yes, that is only, I have made a diagram of how this guarantee level diminishes. And I can, yes, the pensioners saw the OECD and others object, but up until 2022, the politicians persisted. Then here we come to really one of the most important slides, and that is really something that everyone has to remember. And that is when you make the pension, the first year pension dependent on the whole working career, and then the first year pension becomes dependent upon remaining life expectancy. Then everything is open. There is no full pension. There is no statutory pension age. And then you can look at this. These are projections made by the pension authority about how long you need to work in order to get a decent pension. Into 1994, they thought, and we thought, because I was a part of the whole thing then, that it was to go up to a bit below 66. And then you go on and go on and go on. Today it's 68. And how should people be able to follow all this and understand? In Sweden, the situation is that most people still aim at 65. And this is a criticism not only against the pay-as-you-go system of the sort I have mentioned. This is also follows from an individual account system. And what has happened? The first year's pension has dropped from around 60% as it was in the beginning of this period, in the end of the 90s, to 50%. This, to a high degree, depends upon the fact that, as I said, average pension age have not increased much above 65 years. People do not understand what the formula tells them to do. This means that the system leaves them behind, who have not wanted, not understand, not been able to adjust to the new pension system. We have left the individual to face the consequences of demographic change. And what about the employment opportunities for a person, him or her own, for all workers, for healthy people, for the young ones? And what has happened with the social protection systems? Perhaps I was too swift there. You see, in the Swedish system, you get pension rights not only based on your work, but also based on if you are unemployed, sick, have a disability pension, then the state pays contribution for this. But then what about if the state does not adjust these systems to what is needed in pensions? Let's see here. You see, up until this year, the safety net has ended at 65. The opportunity to get sickness cash benefit, unemployment insurance, disability pension ended at 65. Although we saw at this other slide diagram that the need to work now it goes up to 68. But one has not changed the upper limit of the safety net, meaning that many are forced to go on early pension arrangement. At last in 2023, the limit goes up to 66, but as 20 years too late. I mean, because many have had to go on early pension arrangement up till now, and it goes up only to 66 when it needed to go to 68. Yes, and younger people, if they can't be established on the labor market, they do not get unemployment benefits and no pension points for those years. And now again, for people in strenuous occupations, there was no special arrangement. I often mention building industry and healthcare. They are supposed to work until 68. Then we also have to realize that over this whole period, it's not only that they have not increased the upper limit for the safety net, they have made the criteria for getting such benefits more restrictive. Today it's nearly impossible to get the disability pension. Okay, that was about the first year's pension. And then we come to pensions in payment. I don't think I can, yeah, perhaps. Okay, here we can see what happens to a pension awarded a person in 2009 of some 30,000 Swedish crowns. And we can see here the wages, how that developed. We can see how we have here to follow the green line and the red, how it should have developed following the formula for how to index pensions in payment. There we have this. There is it follows wages minus 1.6%. Then we have this automatic balancing mechanism, which means that the real pension followed this red line for many years. And there we have it. This is this automatic balancing mechanism that I mentioned to you in the beginning. That was introduced in order to make it possible to forever promise unchanged contributions. And so the forecast indicated that in the beginning of 2009, that there were risks for the financial balance at unchanged contributions. And what happened? The red line shows how the pensions should have been. The blue one shows how it really developed. It was down for a couple of years to 94% of what it should have been. And now we have to realize the formula to preserve the unchanged contributions was made in such a way that all consequences of forecasts or problems for finances was put on the pensioners. Nothing was taken from the active population. When this mechanism was introduced, it was said that it should be needed only in extreme circumstances. But as a matter of fact, the economy was blooming during this year. Okay. Now we come to 2022. The system collapsed. The problem that I have mentioned couldn't be contained anymore. The political pressure was too high. So an income pension supplement was added to the pay-as-go pension. That was financed over the state budget. That broke the idea that we should not have any tax subsidies. The minimum pension was raised substantially in 2022. And I must, the others have said to me, don't say this, but I say it. This increase of the minimum pension was enacted for the sole purpose to make a certain person prime minister. It's important to say, to my mind, these changes were needed. The problem is that the principles of this system were broken by this. Earnings-related pension does not follow life earnings anymore. Tax subsidies are introduced in the earnings-related pension system. Minimum pension does not follow only development of cost of living anymore. Only the idea of a never changed contribution remains. And to my mind, they should have begun with realizing that we must open for increased contributions. And then these changes could have been made in the framework of this new knowledge that we have to be open to increase contributions. Now, I do hope that we will have a new start of the system. And I mean that we have to begin by discussing, why do we have a public pension scheme? And I say, poverty relief, support to retain living standard, realize that people, ordinary people, and even experts, we can't see from 40 years up until 65. We have to accept that people need support when it comes to arranging for the very distant future. Why do we have, I mean, it can be otherwise in other countries. This is my start. And I think that it is really very important for Swedish politicians to discuss where they stand in these respects. And I say also to everyone, if you can't stand to these goals, okay, change the system and or the environment, or give up the objectives. Okay, what do I think should be preserved? Work more and up to a higher age is a realistic approach. A financially stable earnings-related pension is important. But as I have described here, the Swedish system has transferred too much risk onto the individual. The result is that we have neither adequate pensions, nor social justice, nor transparency. And it's not only me who said that, it is what dominates the Swedish debate today. And therefore, and I am back where I began, it must be revised in order to establish a fair balance between contributions, pension amounts, and pension age. And that cannot be handled by formulas. And we have to realize that other welfare systems, as disability pensions and so forth, and the labor market influence the outcome of a pension system. So take it into account when evaluating it. And here we have this conclusion. I have already said it many times. Don't believe that you can relieve politicians of responsibility. That is not possible. If politicians do not want to take responsibility, then we are back to the averting the old age crisis from the World Bank in the 90s. Forget about promising to hold contribution fixed forever. We have seen the consequences of this. Now, here is another slide that I can't say so very much about, but for those who are incoming actuaries and pension politicians and everyone, you must understand that after this campaign in the 90s about the traditional benefit-defined system that were too weak, and Sweden advanced a new way of solving problems. Many countries have gone the same way. Here I mentioned Germany, Canada, Japan, Finland, and Norway. And if you go to what I recommend here, the pensions at a glance by yearly document from OECD, you will find a whole big chapter on such things. Here I only want to mention and ask you to see what I say about Norway and Canada, where you see completely different ways of handling the need to balance benefits and contributions. And what I propose to the Swedish government is to establish a 5-year period as a basis for a political review of the balance in the system itself and its dependence on all external factors, and charge the government to suggest changes needed. That is what is done in Canada, I can mention. And German have also a very interesting approach to this. And I also want the government and the authorities to inform the individuals much better about the risks and possibilities in the future. By making this, politicians becomes responsible once again. And I have quoted here Mr. Hagemeyer. Let me say, I should want what is former said in Europe, the social partners, to cooperate much closer. I mean, it's the workers, the employers, and the state to together take responsibility for pension systems. But it might be unrealistic. So at least establish an independent body with the responsibility to every 5 years produce a report data for evaluating how the pension system fulfill its task. And there all the social partners could be engaged. And then time has come for a structural reform of the system. And I should say that first I should want the Swedish government to take a new look at this lifetime perspective, that the whole life's earnings becomes decisive for the pension. I think that the reference period, it must of course not be 50, 30 years as we had before, but let's say 30, 40 years. You must work inside the system for 40 years. The pension basis on the 30 best years, all indexed wages. That might be a better system, because much of the Swedish problem originates from the fact that this weakness of the lifetime perspective has not been observed. So there I come to the end, only to say to upcoming actuaries, I have tried to explain perhaps a bit too swift technicalities and problems in politics, and that you have to think about traditions and values, and you have to see and understand that politicians are under external pressure. Actuarial experts must hold all these aspects clearly in mind and must not be influenced by political wishes. This, I can tell you, is a very, very hard thing, because you will always be under such pressure. But you are so important to get a good result. Thank you for listening. That is all.
Thank you, Mr. Scherman, with this talk. Have we any questions?
I wonder if he could stop sharing the screen so that we can have the rest, please. That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, thank you for your time, Mr. Gustaf. Thank you for explaining all these wonderful presentations to all the actuarial students here. And my question would be, are there any work opportunities for people that are over 65 years old, and what could be the challenges for them principally at this age?
Yeah. After all, this is a very basic question. And when it comes to many professions, it's not realistic to speak about working above 65. From time to time, I say, At the end, a worker in the building industry in Stockholm has to go to Luleå to seek a position as professor. I mean, the elite, there is no problem for them. I should really say that for most ordinary people, they can work more than to 65. What we need to do, what we had needed to do, was to work much harder in order to get the employment market to function in such a way that it makes it possible for people to work longer. So there are two aspects of this. One is take care of those who can really do not work longer. Second is influence the working market, the employment opportunities. I mean, this comes back to a very, very basic issue about economists believing that if you only establish economic incentives, everything will be okay. This was something that dominated the discussion in the 80s. But I should say that, and there were Nobel Prize winners on this. Now there are Nobel Prize winners who have said, no, that is it not. People do not only follow economic incentives, there are traditions and so forth. So this is really a very, very big problem.
Thank you. Can you make them be interested in saving for their own pension? I think in Mexico now we have to start saving at a young age because we are not going to have a good pension. So how can we make everybody aware that they have to start saving?
The only thing I can say in that respect is that there is a widespread propaganda from banks and funds and so forth, I really do not know what the result is. I must confess that. I mean, after all, in Sweden, people mostly think that the public pension scheme and the occupational pension will be enough. And then when they draw their pension and find that it is not good, then they complain and there is a political discussion. I do not know how do you do to, I mean, what we are talking about is how can we get people to work more? In the general debate, there is not very much said about how do we persuade them to save more. So I do not have any good advice on that issue.
Well, I have one question here for you. Do you suggest that Mexico copies the Swedish pension plan? What do you recommend for Mexico if we need to have a reform?
No, I shall not come with any recommendations for the very simple reason that I do not know the general conditions in Mexico. As I just said, I do not think it's a good idea to try to send out recommendations of that one or the other kind, because it depends upon how your society is organized and what is the values and so forth. I can only tell what I think is good. But I think more important is to say, if someone recommends the Swedish model, please go into it very carefully. And I have tried here, although I realize it was too fast, to explain to you all the problems that follows from that kind of a system. And I only mention in passing that it is even more. It is the same if you have a public pension based on individual accounts, the Chilean model, because it faces people with so many problems. But I mean, I do not know what are the general social security system in Mexico. I mean, after all, Sweden is a very advanced and comprehensive welfare state. There are problems, and I think that the Swedes have not seen the interconnection between the social security system and a pension system of the kind that we have. So I do not want to come with any recommendations. I want to come with a warning. If someone comes to you and say, introduce the Swedish system, then begin to think about how it has functioned in Sweden.
Yeah, maybe that's not possible. Thank you. We have another question here. What do you think is the ideal replacement rate to set an objective for a new pension plan? What would you say it would be? Like 50, 60%? The ideal replacement rate for a new pension plan?
Yeah, and there at once I have to say, what about the occupational pension? Do you have such a do you have occupational pensions for most of the population that we have in Sweden? But I would say that yeah, here in Sweden we have said that we want to have 60%, and on top of that, another 10 percentage points from the occupational pension. But this 60% has diminished to 50, and that is so in Sweden, I should say 60% is what we have been thinking about.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too. Thank you. Another question. Politicians make political decisions to favor them in the elections. Should we exclude them from the design process? What do you think?
No.
I think that your presentation said the contrary. We should make them responsible.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if you say exclude them, I mean, what you have said then is, the question is, should we privatize the whole thing? That is,
maybe I think.
But no, I'm absolutely against this idea. But once again, this calls for responsible politicians. But I can't see, if you say to leave them out, whom will you put in then? If you leave them out, what is the alternative? For me, it's only a public pension or a private pension. And what the World Bank recommended was that, and we have to remember, the traditional defined benefit system did not function well. I mean, they were designed in the 50s and the 60s, and then everyone believed that the growth in economy, it would never be any problems to increase the contributions as much as was needed. This proved not to be correct. Then the World Bank came in, and all financial institutions and others, and economists. And they said, no, the politicians can't handle this. So they said, reduce the public engagement into some restrictive, means-tested benefit, and then leave the rest to the private market. And what can I say? I can only hope that the idea of a public responsibility for a decent pension can be picked up in many quarters of the world. Because if you say privatize the whole thing, where are then those who have problems? Where are those who have problems because they have not been able to plan for the future? What about the building workers that I are talking about? My opinion is that we need, I want systems with a certain solidarity between people. And that can't be done without politicians, responsible politicians. But once again, this is what I feel, and it's not a recommendation.
Let me ask you a question, Professor Sherman. I had the opportunity to live in Russia for 4 years during the 1991 transition from the old Soviet system. But I'm curious, what are the social security pension systems that exist in socialist countries, for example, China and Russia? How do they address that problem? How do they solve it? What can you tell us about those systems? Are they something to copy and to model like?
I am very sorry, but I can't tell you. I was very much engaged in this. We had a special program for Eastern Europe and the former Soviet states, but that is far away. I can't tell you. I do not know how they have developed. I must confess that I have had some. No, I must confess I don't know how they are today. I have one remembrance, and that was when the World Bank tried to implement a World Bank system in Kazakhstan, and that collapsed 6 months after it was introduced. But that was in the 2010s or something. I was there and talked to them. I don't know what has happened. Must confess.
But they had introduced in Kazakhstan the Chilean model, actually, the individual accounts. That's what they have now.
Oh, they have? Did they?
Yeah,
Did they ultimately succeed?
And they didn't succeed, and they came back. But if David, if you're interested, these intergenerational dialogues that we are having, they have attracted so much interest in many. I have 2 additional volunteers to give speeches. One is from Russia and Ukraine. He has been working in Russia and Ukraine, and another one has been working in the pension reform in China. So possibly we will not.
I hope you send me a link.
I will send you the links. I know you might know them because they work at ISSA, and ISSA now they are consultants. But of course, we will not have as many intergenerational dialogues for this. But I would be happy to share the links to.
I remember being invited to China to help them, but that never materialized.
No. Well, thank you very much, Lourdes.
We have one last question, if we may. What are the consequences of having most of the pensions privatized abroad?
You mean what are the consequences, the practical consequences in other countries? Yes, there is another. I mean,
okay.
No.
Yeah, Herman did that question. Do you mind?
You mean
Herman,
you yeah.
Yeah. It's okay.
Your question was how private systems functions in various countries.
Yes, or we get our pensions from abroad. I don't think what the question means. Herman, you did that question. You typed it in the chat. Do you want to?
Yes. what I refer is what are in a country, what are the consequences economically and everything to have the most pension of the people residing in the country outside of the country, that enterprises outside of the country uh, finance these pensions, or for example, banks or insurances that are not from original from the country.
This is really a wonderful question, but I mean, then we come back to very fundamental questions about the state responsibility and how we can cope in a world where everything is spread all over the world and so forth. So I can only say that I think that each country responsible for its citizens must realize that they themselves must see to it that they can finance their social security system, including pensions.
It's an interesting question because if you want to peg, in some countries, you have the problem of devaluations. So maybe, how do you develop a model that pegs pensions to a hard currency, call it the euro or call it the US dollar or, whatever. Because if you set up a pension just, for example, in Mexico, Mexican pesos, that's going to fluctuate. And that, of course, it's affected by, but anyway, that's a very different topic that maybe we don't have time to discuss today. So.
David, I think we're going to address that issue when we'll have the presentation by Sergio Arbizu, because he was the CEO of the United Nations Pension Fund, and he collected contributions from something like 120 countries, but he paid contributions paid pensions in 16 different currencies. So he will address that particular issue very directly.
Thank you.
So we invite you to the next intergenerational dialogue so you can find out. I think that would be all. Yes?
Thank you. If you allow me, Lourdes,
yeah?
I would just like to thank once more. It was a privilege. It was a treat to have Professor Scherman with us. To me, it was an eye-opener, because when you see Sweden from Mexico or from abroad, you believe that everything is running perfectly and that they don't even have problems, that they're not even humans. But now you see that they're humans. Politicians are politicians, and decisions are decisions, and not everything is working perfectly. So it's good to have also humans having problems. Sorry for Sweden. And I think we have a challenge in the actuarial profession, because I think we are in the middle of something like a perfect storm. Because when we had our courses at the Anahuac University, we were taking care of demography, the economy, and the financial sector. And demography is not going well anywhere. Fertility is going down everywhere. Economy, you see the growth rates all over the world are going down or are close to zero. In Europe, we're going to face a recession pretty soon. And in Latin America and in Mexico, you have a very large informal sector, which is informal. And to add to all that, you have almost zero or negative real interest rates. So all our actuarial modeling that we were doing when we were at school at the Anahuac University, they are facing many problems. So I think we have to move forward and to think different ways. So I think
and to learn from other countries, so we can share. Maybe there are the same problems, and we can share some solutions. So yeah, thank you, Professor Scherman. Thank you all for being here today, and I wish you all the best in your retirement planning. So bye-bye.
Thank you.